Hey, I'm back.
Okay. How was your Christmas?
Well, it was very quiet. Our kids were none of them here, so um, we took some stuff over to one of our friends for her Christmas dinner, and we ate our Christmas dinner the day before, so we could take it over to
Oh,
her. So then we were planning to go out to eat yesterday, but it sounded like the restaurant we were going to was totally overcrowded, so we stayed home. And we may go over there today. We'll see.
oh, nice.
But anyway, we had a good time.
That's good. Yeah, it was nice with my mom's here and my youngest sister and one
Oh,
of
that's
her
nice.
one of her kids. I saw one of the oldest daughter earlier. She was spending part of the day with her boyfriend's family.
Uh-huh. Well, that's the beginning of the rest of their life. It'll be 1 year with one family and next year with the other.
Exactly. It's like, okay, this is getting serious enough.
Yeah, see. Well, I'm glad you had family there. It sounds like a good time.
Yeah, it was
So,
nice. And a friend from church. She hasn't been attending lately, but she's still a friend. So she had nowhere else to go, and so that
well,
was
that's
nice.
nice.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
for talking to me. So I just thought it'd be good just to kind of chat about the project and get ideas to what to talk about and things like
Sure.
that.
Well, do you have questions or do you want me to start talking or what?
Um, yeah, I think there's some general things that that we're going to want to cover. Yes, a lot of it is, yeah, what do you feel is significant or important to you and in the journey, and
Yeah.
part of it I'm thinking about just overall needing somehow
Okay.
to um, give a background of the Adventist Church for those that don't know anything. So
Yeah,
it
right.
might be where we actually do a section of um, a bit about the church. However, when somebody's talking, if you can give a context, would be good too.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think it is good to give a little context, and I probably could do that pretty well because we had worked at the GC. In fact, we were there when we found out about Paul. So um, we knew at that time there was just nothing being said about it. It
Yeah.
was a hush hush subject, and I just I can't hold things in to myself, so I had to talk to people about it. So I went and talked to my pastor, both of them, and I wrote letters to the review and um, to. Uh, I wrote an article for the review, but that was later. But anyway, it just was something you felt like you couldn't even talk about at the time I
Mm-hmm.
first found out about Paul. Um, I let's see. You've probably read my book, haven't you? Or not?
Yeah, I think several years ago.
Yeah. So at the time we found out about him, he was engaged to a girl, and all of a sudden they broke up, and I just couldn't understand this. And as I began thinking about it and questioning it, I remember seeing a paper that he had written. He stayed home 1 year and went to CUC, and he'd taken a class in creative writing from Joe Wheeler. You know who he is?
Yeah, I've heard the name. Yeah.
He writes. He was teaching English that year, but he's the one that's written all the Christmas in Your Heart books.
Oh, yes. No wonder I know the name.
Anyway, Paul was taking a class from him, and he had written this story that he'd left on his desk when I was cleaning his room, and it just raised a lot of questions in my mind. And so I began to think about it, and all of these memories of different things that had happened that I hadn't really identified began to come back to me. So when he broke off his engagement, I finally called him. Well, actually, I called the pastor that at PUC that he and his girlfriend had gone to for premarital counseling. And I asked him, I said, I'm just having questions now. Do you think I should talk to Paul about this? And there was this long silence. And then he said, yes, but be very careful not to say anything that would drive him in the opposite direction, or in the direction we don't want him to go. So that sort of gave me the clue. So I wrote to Paul first, and then I called him. And that was when I found out about him. And then the next year we were in Lincoln, Nebraska. Bob was working at the Christian Record for a couple of years there. And I was taking a creative writing class myself from a teacher there at the university. And he asked us to write a story about the most dramatic event in our lives. So I wrote a story about that. And everybody thought it was something that I should follow up on and write a book. So that was when I decided to write my book. And it was actually published by Pacific Press, to my amazement. So when it came out, I got a call from, his name was Doug, and he taught at Walla Walla, but I can't think of his last name. Maybe somebody else would remember, probably Floyd or Bob Bouchard would remember. Anyway, or even Dave
Ferguson.
Ferguson, yeah. Anyway, he called me and asked me if I'd be willing to come and speak at camp meeting, tell my story. So I did. It was at that church camp just out of Portland a ways.
Is that Manuka?
Yeah, Manuka, that was it. So I went. I didn't stay the whole time because I was working, but I went for the weekend. And when I told my story, I was nervous and scared. But they gave me a standing ovation, so I was gratified. And that was where Dave Ferguson talked to me and wanted me to do something for parents because they were having such a hard time. So that was when I started my newsletter. And I kept that up for about probably 11 or 12 years. And then I started a website on the internet called Someone to Talk To, and which was the name of my newsletter. So I eventually stopped my newsletter because I was pretty much reaching people through the website.
Uh-huh.
So then after that, I think somewhere in there, I decided to go try to see if I could hold a booth at General Conference. That was the 2000 General Conference in Ontario, Canada. I believe it was. Or let's see. what it was. There was what is the capital of Ontario? I think that's where it was.
Oh,
Anyway.
yeah. I don't
Anyway,
think about it right now. Yeah.
yeah, but it was, and so I got a booth there, and I had a lot of information. I had some of my newsletters and other material, books to read, and so forth. And that year, Kathy Phillips and Ella Hammond, Craig Hammond's mother, both came and helped me with it. I think I have a picture somewhere of us in our booth.
That'd be fun if you have it.
Yeah, I'll try to find that and send it to you along with some of the newsletters. So we actually had a pretty good reaction to it there. There was just one person who, I forget who he brought Angel Rodriguez, one of the BRI people, over to my booth and was excitingly talking to him in Spanish and pointing to different things. And Angel took a look at it, but he didn't say anything to me. So I think I had one thing there about Sodom and Gomorrah, which to me was pretty convincing that had nothing to do with homosexuality, but rather it was gang rape. So anyway, nobody said anything, and then just a week or two after that, I had a booth at the ASI convention, and some lady saw this and was all upset. Some lady in a long dress and bobby socks, one of the what should I say, the fringe element are the ones that are particularly involved with ASI. So she went and talked to somebody in charge, and shortly before it was over, they called Bob and me in, because Bob was with me there, and were asking me all kinds of questions. And the next year when I tried to get booth, they wouldn't let me, so I guess they weren't too happy about that. But I continued to have booths at several large conventions that the church held, like, let's see, I was going to write them all down, but I forgot to. There was a laity festival of the laity conference in Orlando, and Kathy and Terry, who were still together then, were there to help me. And there was another youth conference, I think, in Atlanta. And with many of these, Floyd and Dave Ferguson, or a friend of Floyd's that lived in Dallas, came and helped me on them. So there was a youth congress in Atlanta, and then there was another, I think it was a youth congress in Dallas, or maybe it was a youth prayer conference or something. I can maybe look up and find a few more details about this and let you know.
Okay.
I should have done it sooner, but Christmas has kept me busy.
Yeah, that's fine. And these things help. And part of this too is then we start talking and thinking about something, and then it's reminding about other things. So
that's
so part of the process.
Well, what's that?
I said this is all part of the process of stirring up memories and.
Right. Well, let's see. There was another one in Denver, I believe. So anyway, there were about 6 or 7 conferences altogether where I had a booth. And then somehow they decided that Willie Oliver, and who was the Family Ministries director at the GC at that time, and Dean oh dear, he was the one that was in charge of the exhibit area, and they decided that there were things on my website that seemed to indicate support for gay marriage. And I don't remember exactly what that was. I think I had stories by people that had been married and that it to a straight partner, and that it hadn't worked out for or something. And maybe stories about a few stories about gays that were married and how they handled their situation. Anyway, they decided that I couldn't have a booth anymore. So I think it was in 2010 when they wouldn't let me have a booth. But Spectrum was having their booth, and they called it the Big Tent of Adventism. And they invited me to share their booth. And it was just at the very last minute that they found out I was going to be with Spectrum, and they told them that no, I could not be with them. So I had Dave and Floyd, I think, came with me that year, and we had already bought our tickets. We'd found a place to stay, and so we decided that we were going to go anyway, and we would ask some hot potato questions. We would interview people as they went through the exhibit hall and ask them these hot potato questions about, some were about women's ordination or about evolution being taught in our schools, and of course some things about homosexuality. I think we had about 10 questions. And we got over 1,000 interviews on that. So then I wrote up an article for, I think that one went to Adventist Today, about the reaction and what people thought on all the different questions. Then after that, you know who Aben Fulton is at PUC?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, he was still teaching then, and so I asked him some questions about how I could do a survey on the attitudes of Adventists in general. So he gave me all the pointers and said he would work with me on it. And so we sent out questionnaires for all the people in their church to about, I think it was 25 different churches around the U.S. Some were large, some were small, and some were ones that we knew were more liberal, and some were more conservative. So it was a pretty good cross section. And I wrote up an article that I think that one appeared in Adventist Today too. Maybe the other one, I'll have to look that up. One was in it. I think the other one was actually in Spectrum. Anyway, so those are two. Alvin worked with me on that one, and he actually had a couple of his students work on it too, and they presented it at some big psychiatrist meeting or psychologist meeting. So it saw quite a bit of coverage, but the meeting they went to wasn't Adventist, of course. I'm trying to think what else we did. Anyway, as far as with Paul, as I was working on my book, he was very happy that I was doing it. Cooperated, and told me a lot about how he had felt as he was going through this and before we knew about it. So he was very happy about me publishing this book. But then he lived with this Catholic guy for about 9 years. And they decided towards the end of the time they lived together that they were not comfortable being sexually active, so they um, weren't anymore. And then he decided to go back east to work in a Catholic. He became a Catholic while he was living with Jeff. And then they went back east he went back east to work for some big Catholic foundation back there. And while he was there, he met a priest and two, what do they call them, novitiates that had joined his new monastery that he was just building. And they would come down to the foundation every once in a while. And Paul got acquainted with them during the year that he worked there. And he decided that he would like to join the monastery. Well, it was a Carmelite monastery, and they are a cloistered order. So that meant that if he stayed there and took final vows, that we would never see him again in our lives. He could only come to our funerals, which was pretty depressing. And he spent that summer staying with us and getting ready to go to the monastery, which was a pretty bittersweet time. But he was back there for about 9 months when he got the head priest there was trying to help him stop being gay, so he was trying to demand that Paul surrender his will to the priest, and that would give him the idea of how to surrender his will to God. Well, it got very dysfunctional, and Paul finally decided to come home after about 9 or 10 months. Well, we were thankful for that. Actually, I was supposed to tell you how I got into kinship, wasn't I?
Yeah, that's fine. And it doesn't have to be all sequential.
That's good. You can figure that out later, maybe.
And this is helping to know kind of what we talk about when we're filming. And
yes, right.
So.
Okay. Well, when I went to speak at Kinship Camp meeting, I was really impressed with all the people there and how they seemed to love and miss Adventism. And so I really wanted to do what I could to help them. So that's when I started my newsletter. But then I went to several other camp meetings and stayed through the whole week. And I was especially impressed when they had the communion service on Friday night and the musical service on Sabbath morning were just heavenly. And so when they asked me if I would join the kinship board and work with families and friends, that was how I got started with kinship. And I can't remember exactly how many years I did that, but I think it was probably 4 or 5 or maybe even 6. I'm sure there's records somewhere that would show that. I could ask Floyd if he remembers. Anyway, I went to a lot of different camp meetings in the beginning until I got to where it was harder for me to travel. So I really enjoyed working with the board and felt like we got a good start on bringing more families, more parents, and all into because I did get a lot of response to my newsletter, including people that weren't parents, several from children of gay people, and so it was and wives like Kathy. So it was, of course, Kathy didn't know when she was getting my newsletter. She thought it was just her son, but she then she found out it was her husband too.
Right. That's quite a journey.
Oh, that was a real journey. And it's broken my heart as I've associated with kinship for so long to see people pull away from the church because of the way the church has treated them. And Kathy is one, and her husband. And then another one that just really hurts is Janine and Stephen. Especially Stephen, he doesn't.
Yes.
He's almost an agnostic or something now.
Yeah, he's had quite a
which I can certainly understand. If I didn't have such a strong connection with the church through all the years we've worked for the church, and all my family, well, a large part of my family is Adventist, and most of my friends. So it's just probably if I didn't have that connection, I would have left too by now. But I still feel like between the things that I've done and that Stephen and Deneen have done and other people, the church has been forced to confront this a little bit. Of course, they haven't confronted it very well, but in NAD and in Europe, there's a growing understanding. It's more, here in America, it's more ground roots, I think. People in the local churches that are learning about their kids or something, and somebody that they've known for a long time, and it's really changed their attitudes, I think. And of course, the way society has changed and accepted it. But I'm thrilled that NAD is finally doing something more positive. You've heard about or seen the book that they put out recently, didn't you?
I did see some things about it, yes.
Yeah, that was the biggest encouragement to me. So, well, I don't know. I can't think of any more unless you have some questions.
Yes. Well, I've had the sense of your husband's, personally, I have the sense of his, total support. How has this, with your activism, how has that affected him? And I'm sure it's different when, working for the church and retired.
Actually, I was really proud of him because when he was working for the church, especially when we were out here, we moved out here to Washington about maybe 8 years after my book was published. So when he would speak around the conference at different places, and he'd tell me things he'd said that were supportive, I was just amazed. And I know that he has pretty much come along with me on his beliefs, on his acceptance of homosexuality. Sometimes he thinks I talk too much about it, and I think sometimes he gets just a little bit embarrassed. But I do think he will stand up for gays and lesbians as much as he does for women's ordination. He's very strongly for that too. So I think it comes from me sharing. I just read everything I could find about it after I found out about Paul, and I would share it with him, and we'd watch some things on television, and I just think it sort of brought him along with me to a different understanding. Of course, he's not as activist as you say.
Yeah, and that's we all have our gifts.
Yes, and his big interest is his seniors organization that go overseas for a mission trip every year and do a lot of things around the conference. So that's what he's tied up in.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see. I'm just looking at notes and things.
Okay.
One thing we kind of talked about in general, kind of the church. I'm just thinking out loud.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just still kind of about where the church.
Where the church is.
The church. The original, when you first found out about your son in general, or at least the church in your cultural church in your area, what do you, in your words, what was the view of homosexuality besides just don't talk about it, or was it just don't talk about it?
Well, they did have, when I was afraid to say anything definite, but I did go to the church ministries department and asked them. I said, my friend son just told her he's gay, and do you have anything I can give her to read? So they gave me all this stuff about Colin Cook, and that was mainly what they had at that time. And this was just before things blew up for him,
Right.
After, so at that time they were really pushing him, and so I thought this was wonderful. This was just before Paul came home for spring vacation after we found out about him, and so I was telling him so excitedly, "Here's something that will help you." And he said, "Mom, haven't you heard about him?" He said, "He's been abusing gay people, and he's no good. You wouldn't want me to go to him." So that was
a
disappointment for me. Yeah. But I believed him. He has always been one of my most spiritual children, and maybe part of that was because he realized what he was up against and was trying to be as good as he could,
Mm-hmm.
But whatever it was, he was really trying to do what was right.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was about 7 or 8 7th or 8th grade when he realized what was different about him. But really at that time, that was all. I was afraid to talk to anybody because nobody that I'd heard of had ever. I never heard really. I knew very little about it at that point, except I knew it was supposed to be terrible, and that's why I was trying to read everything about it because I knew Paul wasn't like that. So, and I began to write letters to. I had quite a few people at the GC because at first I had no ideas about promoting gay marriage or anything.
Right.
I was just feeling sorry for all these people, and the way that the church didn't understand them. So I would write to people, and I had, I think it was the women's ministry people wanted me to send them the newsletters out to all their leaders throughout the North America, and what else? Well, family ministry, very promoting me too around. So at first they seemed to think that I really had something to offer, and it wasn't until for years, I would say for probably 3 years, 2 or 3 years, I did not, actually longer than that probably, maybe for the first 5 years, I did not, would not read any thing that was promoting a different theology. And finally, it was Ben Kamina. I don't know if you know Ben, but he was more active in kinship for a while. He was the editor of Connection for a couple years. Anyway, he had somehow gotten in touch with me, and so he kept encouraging me to read some of this other stuff, which I finally did, and I was fairly quickly convinced that, well, within a couple of years, I'd say I was convinced that the Bible didn't really say what I supposed it said. So, and the more I began to share these ideas with the GC, the more I began to be cut off there. So, but I used to write to a lot of people at the GC. Sometimes I'd send, when Jan Paulson was the president, I went in to see him and talk to him, and I sent letters to all the vice presidents and all the secretaries, I think even all the treasurers. And so I was really trying to educate people at the GC to have a little more sympathetic view. But the more I did, and then the more when, I guess, Falkenberg and then Ted Wilson came in to lead, that was one thing I could never understand, because Ted and his father has a brother who's gay, and then he has a son who's gay. So it's like Ted's uncle and cousin are like Neil's brother and nephew. And they have just been totally opposed to it. I don't know if it's embarrassing to them or what, but they certainly didn't react the way I did. I was wanting to defend my son, but they didn't have that attitude. I don't know whether it was what exactly. I don't know their. Well, actually, I did know. It was a friend of Bob's at PUC that married Ted's brother. I mean, Neil's brother. And then they split up after she found out he was gay. So I did know a little bit about him. Anyway, it seems like they, as far as the General Conference, they have hardened their hearts completely towards homosexuality now. But on the other hand, there's been, I'm sure you've heard about kinship. What's our group? Kinship Advisory, that has worked with. They're teachers, professors, editors, doctors, so forth, that have learned, have been educated about homosexuality and are very supportive. So, and then other pastors throughout the NAD and church leaders there's quite a few of them that have become educated. So now we're seeing a gradual beginning of support from the NAD. And also, of course, I don't know if you're going to be talking to Catherine, but Floyd will tell you too, because he's worked closely with her about the work in Europe. And that's been probably evolved into supportive, in some countries anyway, faster than it has here. But anyway, it's I expect I'll be one of the first persons kicked out of the church by the Homosexuality Compliance Committee.
Oh, and Nick, I can tell you're trembling in your shoes.
Well, I think it comes down to the local church, and I think they would support me.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but that's about all I can say about the church, really.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to be looking at calendars, trying to figure out a time to travel up your way.
Okay, your mom lives up here somewhere, doesn't she? In
She's
Auburn
in.
or somewhere.
She in was it May? She moved to Tillamook, Oregon.
Oh, she did. Oh,
Yes,
I
so
didn't realize
she's
that.
near Fred Casey. In
Oh,
fact,
yeah.
he
I
stu-
never hear anything about Fred anymore. Is he active at all
not
in
so much,
kinship?
not with so much with kinship. He is, yeah, he's had a lot of things going in his life in the last several years. Yeah, his
Oh,
partner, quite a few years ago, his partner passed away.
yeah, I
Um,
knew about that. That
and
was
then
terrible.
about a year ago, his house caught fire.
Oh, my.
And he just moved in a few months ago, I think. I stopped by when I was up seeing my mom a couple months ago.
Uh-huh.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful renovation. Um,
Well, I have his email address, and I should get in contact with him again because we were good friends.
yeah, he's a great guy. He hasn't been involved in the church for eons. However, he
Yeah.
did just start directing the church choir that my mom's in.
Oh, really?
So she's
Well, that's,
enjoying that. Fred's mom lives there. She lives next door. They have houses on the same property.
uh-huh.
So,
Well,
yeah, so I'm going to figure out a time in the next month or so to come up that
okay.
way and hopefully film you and also Fred because
Okay.
he's got a
Well,
lot of
I'll be glad to see you.
yes. And one thing too that I forgot to tell you at the beginning of the call is that just so you know I'm sure it's okay, but that I've been recording so I can
Oh, yeah, I thought
get
maybe you
you.
would
Get
because
you.
it'd be hard to write it all down.
Yeah, I've been making notes, but also yeah.
Sure. Well, that's fine with me.
Okay.
You can smooth out some of my rambling thoughts there.
So yeah, I make sure that I capture things.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, as I get figuring out times, then schedule, then we can talk more about topics, questions.
Okay.
One thing too, just and I'll remind you, but just in the interview, if there's a question, your response would be a statement, not answering the question.
I see. Okay.
So that in editing,
You can get it out the
that
question.
the question may not even be there.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's something too. I mean, as we're talking, it can always be, oh, can you restate that?
Okay.
So,
Yeah, right. That'll be a reminder.
so yeah, that's kind of one of the things that I think takes a bit of, rethinking things.
Sure.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Peter. This is a wonderful thing you're doing.
Thank you. I don't know what I've gotten myself into, but
I don't know. I'm not a very. I'm going to look like an old lady, but that's okay. The kinship members will remember what I used to look like, which was a little better, not a whole
well,
lot.
you know that how I got into this is that I've been working on a project called Faces of Our Elders, Keeping Their Legacy Alive.
Oh,
That I've
that's
just felt
great.
called to be collecting interviews and stories of people's lives before they pass away and portraits and stuff. So
Right.
age is a good thing. That's how we
Yes,
have
I earned
life.
every.
That's how we
I
have
was going to
life
say I earned.
stories.
Right. I was going to say I earned every one of my wrinkles.
Yes,
And my
exactly.
white hairs. Okay.
Yes.
Well, give me a call and we'll work something out.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you again.
Uh huh. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye.